Nobody in Harlan County noticed the boy. Not the woman walking her dogs past the corner of Birch and Fifth every evening at 4:45. Not the man who ran the hardware store and swept his doorstep every afternoon at the same hour. Not the kids who rode their bikes down the long flat stretch of Meridian Road, the ones who shouted at each other and swerved into parked cars for sport. None of them noticed the small shape moving along the far edge of the sidewalk every single school day at 10 minutes past 3, shoulders pulled in, chin down, backpack straps clutched tight in both fists, like he was bracing for impact that hadn't arrived yet. He walked close to the fences. He walked close to the hedges. He walked in the thin strip of space between the world and whatever was pressing up behind him, and he did it every day for 11 weeks, before anyone outside that school's hallways understood why. His name was Daniel Reyes. He was 9 years old. He weighed 61 pounds, and every afternoon, somewhere between the school's front doors and the 3/4-mile stretch of road that led to his grandmother's house on Callaway Street, something happened to him that no adult had yet seen, and no adult had yet stopped, until one afternoon in late October, when a man none of them had ever seen before came down Meridian Road on a Harley-Davidson Softail at 15 miles an hour, barely faster than a walking pace, and parked himself, and stayed. What happened after that would take until nightfall to fully unfold. But when it was over, the town of Dellwood, Kentucky would be left with a question it had never had to face before. How long had they not been looking? The Longhorn Diners sat at the intersection of Route 9 and County Road 14, 6 miles outside Dellwood proper, and the thin space between a shuttered auto parts depot and a tire warehouse that had been closed since 2009. The sign above the door still had half its neon. The L and the O had burned out years back, leaving a blinking red shard that said Inghorn to anyone who squinted. Inside, the booths were red vinyl, cracked at the seams and repaired with electrical tape, in the way of a building that was still functional, but had stopped expecting company. The coffee came in ceramic mugs that had been washed 10,000 times. The jukebox in the corner still played if you fed it $1, but nobody had fed it $1 in 3 weeks, and the silence it left was the kind that had settled in and made itself comfortable. Tuesday afternoons this time of year were always slow. The lunch crowd was long gone by 2. The dinner crowd would not arrive until 6. In between, the diner existed in a kind of suspension, the ceiling fan making its slow rotation, the smell of fried onions and old coffee mixing into something that was not unpleasant, just permanent, like the smell of a house that has been lived in for a very long time. Marcus Redd came through the door at 2:27 in the afternoon. He was 44 years old. 6'3", 240 pounds of a man who had lived hard and did not particularly want to talk about it. His cut was a patched-up thing, 15 years of chapter history sewn into black leather, the Iron Sun's MC emblem on the back, the sergeant-at-arms patch below his left shoulder. He had a beard that had gone mostly gray in the last 2 years, and a scar that ran from the corner of his left jaw to just beneath his ear, and hands that were large enough and scarred enough that the waitress, a woman named Carol who had worked this counter for 22 years, paused for a half-second before she reached for a mug. He sat at the far end of the counter, back to the wall, eyes on the door. He ordered coffee and said nothing else, and Carol set the mug in front of him and left him to it, because she had been doing this job long enough to know when a person wanted to be left alone and when they were lonely. This was a man who wanted to be left alone. He had been riding since 6 in the morning from Lexington, heading south toward Harlan for a memorial. A brother named Pete Corliss, who had gone into the ground 14 months ago, and whose family had finally gotten around to putting a stone in. Marcus had been the one who found Pete, He had been the one who called it in. He had been the one who sat in the parking lot of Harlan County General for 4 hours before anyone came out to tell him what he already knew. He did not talk about Pete. He did not need to. The way he sat, the particular quality of stillness he had, like a man who had set down something heavy and had not yet decided whether to pick it up again, said enough. He wanted 15 minutes. A hot cup of coffee. To stop thinking about the road. He got 14 minutes. Before we get to who walked through that door, hit subscribe and drop your city in the comments below. I want to know how far this story travels. City, state, wherever you're watching from in the world. I read every single one. Now, back to Delwood. Because what was walking toward that diner at that moment had been walking the same way, alone, for 11 weeks straight. And it was about to change everything. Daniel Reyes was in the 3rd grade at Jefferson Elementary, and he had been in the 3rd grade at Jefferson Elementary for exactly 6 weeks before the boys in 4th grade figured out what kind of boy he was. He was the kind of boy who was small. The kind who was quiet in the manner of children who have already learned that being loud draws the wrong kind of attention. The kind who kept his homework in a folder inside a folder, who raised his hand only when he was absolutely certain of the answer, who had exactly one friend, a girl named Maya, who lived 2 streets over and walked with him part of the way home on Tuesdays when her mother picked her up at 3 instead of 2:30, which was most Tuesdays. His grandmother was named Rosa. She was 68 years old and had arthritis in both knees bad enough that she walked with a cane she hated and refused to discuss. She had raised Daniel since he was 3 years old, after his mother moved to a situation that did not include raising a child. Rosa got up at 5 every morning. She made Daniel's lunch. She had his uniform laid out on the chair beside his door before he was awake. She picked him up from school every day until October, when the arthritis made driving impossible, and the doctor made it formal. So Daniel walked. And on the 3rd day of walking, they found him. There were 3 of them. The leader was a boy named Garrett, who was in 4th grade and large for his age, and had the kind of confidence that comes not from being good at things, but from never having been stopped. His friends were named Tyler and Marcus, confusingly, for our purposes, but we will call them what they were. The 2 boys who watched and did not stop what they watched, which made them as responsible for what happened as the boy who threw the first punch. The first time, they just followed him. Close enough to be felt, far enough to have an excuse. Calling things out. Saying his name in a way that made it sound like a joke. Daniel walked faster. They walked faster. He turned left on Birch Street. They turned left. He crossed to the other side. They crossed to the other side. By the time he reached Rosa's front door, his hands were shaking so badly that he could barely get the key in the lock, and he got inside and stood in the front hallway for 5 full minutes before his heart settled. He did not tell Rosa. He had learned, at 9 years old, the particular calculation of children who are being hurt. The one that goes, if I tell, it will be worse. He had done that math before. He came up with the same answer every time. He did not tell anyone. He walked home. He kept walking. He kept his shoulders pulled in. He kept close to the fences. He walked like a boy who had been taught by experience that the world did not offer help to people like him. He had a habit, every afternoon before he left school, of checking to make sure the photo was still there. It was tucked in the front pocket of his backpack, inside a plastic sandwich bag to keep it from the rain, a photograph of himself and his mother from before. He was 2 years old in the picture. She was laughing at something off camera. He was laughing because she was laughing. He carried it every day like a compass. Not to look at, just to know it was there. He had 61 pounds of 9-year-old courage, and nowhere near enough of it. But he kept going. That was the kind of boy he was. The afternoon Marcus Red came into the diner was the same afternoon Garrett and his 2 associates made a mistake that changed the nature of what they had been doing for 11 weeks. They had been careful until then, in the unthinking way of children who do not think about being careful, but simply sense where the edges are. They pushed in the spaces between the school fence and the sidewalk, between the sidewalk and the road, in the stretch of Meridian Road between the hardware store and the old Methodist church where there were never any adults. They did enough to frighten, not enough to leave marks, not enough for a teacher or a parent or any adult who valued their peace of mind to have to act. But that Tuesday they escalated. Whether from boredom or emboldened by the 11 weeks of nothing, no consequence, no adult, no pushback. They escalated. They took the backpack. Garrett grabbed the strap as Daniel walked past the alley beside the tire warehouse, and the force of it knocked Daniel sideways into the chain-link fence. The bag tore free. Tyler caught it. The photograph, because the zipper was already half broken, spilled out onto the sidewalk. Garrett picked it up. "What is this?" he said. It was not a question. He looked at the photograph the way a person looks at something they have already decided is worthless, and the looking itself was the cruelty. Daniel said, "Please," just the one word, not "please give it back," not "please stop," just "please," the single most compressed sentence a child who has run out of other options can produce. Garrett laughed. Tyler laughed. The 3rd boy said nothing, but he did not move to stop it, which was the same as laughing. "Please," Garrett said back, in a voice calibrated to produce the maximum damage, the kind of echo that a child will still be able to hear with perfect clarity 30 years later in an unguarded moment. Daniel's hands were shaking. He was trembling from his shoulders down. He was not crying. He had made the choice, at some point in the last 11 weeks, that he would not give them the crying. But his eyes were bright with the effort it took not to, and his chin was working, and he looked very small against the fence. The tire warehouse was on his left. The alley ran behind it. There were no houses for a quarter mile, no hardware store sweep, no dog walking route, no adult of any kind. Garrett turned the photograph over, turned it back, made a small motion with his hand, and from the window of the Longhorn Diner, over the lip of a coffee mug, Marcus Red watched all of it. He had not been looking for it. He had been sitting at the far end of the counter, back to the wall the way he always sat, and the window was to his right, and what was happening outside moved into the corner of his vision the way things move when you are not searching for them, but your eyes are trained by a certain kind of life to notice certain kinds of wrongness. He noticed it the way he had once noticed the particular way a man at a bar had been watching the back exit. Not fast, not obvious, just a quality of attention that was wrong for the situation. A man who has been trained to see threat patterns does not stop seeing them when the threat is not aimed at him. He watched the backpack come off. He watched the photograph hit the ground. He watched the small boy say please and get nothing back but his own word bent into cruelty. He set his coffee mug down on the counter. He did not rush. He had never rushed. He stood up from the stool in the slow, particular way of a man who is very large and is making sure the getting up is seen before the arriving. Because arriving without warning is a different thing entirely. Carol saw him stand. She said nothing. He walked to the door and pushed it open and came out into the October air, and the cold came off the highway in a flat line that smelled of asphalt and old leaves. He was across the road and at the mouth of the alley in approximately 30 seconds, which was long enough for him to be seen coming, and short enough that no one had moved. He stopped 8 feet away. He was wearing his cut. He was 6'3" and 240 pounds, and the scar caught the late afternoon light a certain way. He stood in the mouth of the alley with his hands at his sides, and he looked at Garrett, and he said nothing at all. The 3 boys went still. Not scared. Not yet. Not immediately, because boys that age with that kind of confidence have to recalibrate before fear arrives. They had to look at this man and measure him against their prior experience of adults, and what came back from that measurement was not a match for anything in their database. Garrett recovered first, because that was who Garrett was. He said, "This isn't your business." Marcus Red looked at him, just looked at him. The way a person looks at something they have seen many times before and are not particularly impressed by. "Give him his picture back," Marcus said. 5 words. Quiet as the inside of a car. No rising intonation, no threat in the language at all, only in the fact of the man standing there, not moving, not blinking, simply present. Garrett's confidence flickered. Just flickered. He said, "We were just the picture," Marcus said. The 3 boys looked at each other. Tyler looked at the ground. The 3rd boy had already taken 2 slow steps backward in the direction of the road. Garrett was still running his calculation, but the calculation was running out of numbers. He held the photograph out. Marcus did not take it. He looked at Garrett, then at Daniel, and Garrett understood, the way children sometimes understand things faster than adults when they are being looked at by the right person, that he was to give it to the boy, not to the man. Garrett held it out toward Daniel. His hand was not entirely steady. Daniel took it, held it flat against his chest with both hands. The alley was very quiet. The sound of the highway was far away. A single leaf came off the tree at the alley's entrance and fell without a sound. Garrett turned and walked. Tyler followed. The 3rd boy was already gone. Marcus watched them go until they had turned the corner at Birch Street. He did not move until they were around it and out of sight, and then he turned and looked at the small boy standing against the fence with both hands pressed flat against his chest. Daniel was looking up at him, not afraid, or not only afraid, looking at him with the particular expression of someone who had expected nothing and received something and did not have a word for what the something was. "You okay?" Marcus asked. Daniel thought about this with a seriousness that was not childlike. He said, "They'll come back tomorrow." Marcus looked down at him. He looked at the 61 pounds of this child, at the coat 2 sizes too large, at the broken backpack strap that had been knotted back together with a piece of yellow twine. He said, "I know." He did not say anything else right then. He looked down Meridian Road toward Callaway Street, and he looked at the boy, and he made a decision that was not complex and was not dramatic and did not feel to him like a decision at all. It felt like the only available option. "Which way is home?" he said. And then he did it. He walked Daniel Reyes home. Not beside him. That was not what the boy needed. A large man he had met 3 minutes ago walking beside him, confirming to anyone watching that he required an escort, that he was the kind of person who needed protecting. Marcus understood that instinctively. Understood it with the part of him that had grown up in a neighborhood where the calculation of visibility and vulnerability was made every single morning. He walked behind him, 50 feet back, far enough that they were not together, close enough that anyone watching from ahead or from the sides would see them both. Daniel walked. Marcus followed. Daniel reached Callaway Street. He reached the greenhouse with the small porch. He reached the door. He turned and looked back once, and Marcus was 50 feet behind him, standing at the corner with his hands in his jacket pockets. He gave the boy a nod. That was all. A nod. Daniel went inside. Marcus stood at the corner for 2 more minutes. Then he turned and walked back toward the Longhorn. He sat back down at the counter. Carol refilled his coffee without being asked and looked at him once and went back to the other end of the counter, because she knew, again, the difference between a man who wants to talk and a man who does not. He had a memorial in Harlan. He had a brother to stand for and a stone to put flowers on and a ride that was still half a day long. He sat with his coffee and did not think about any of that. He came back on Wednesday. He parked on Meridian Road at 3:05 on Wednesday afternoon and waited. He saw Daniel come out of the school gates at 3:09, backpack on, chin down, moving along the far edge of the sidewalk. He saw, at a distance of 2 blocks, Garrett and Tyler and the third boy watching Daniel leave. Marcus got off the Harley. He walked to a position that placed him between the school and the boys, not confrontationally, not obviously. He stood near the corner of Birch and 5th with his back to a utility pole and his arms crossed and his eyes forward. The 3 boys saw him. Garrett saw him. Garrett looked at him for a long time, and Marcus looked at the middle distance past Garrett's head, and the 3 boys consulted each other with glances that took approximately 4 seconds. They went back inside the school grounds. Daniel walked the length of Meridian Road. He walked down Birch Street. He turned onto Callaway. He reached the green house. He went inside. Marcus got back on the Harley and rode. He came back on Thursday. He came back on Friday. He came back the following week and the week after that. He found a rhythm in it. He had work in Lexington that kept him north most mornings, and the ride south to Delwood was an hour and a half, and an hour and a half back, and he did not think of these 3 hours as a cost. He did not think of them as anything other than the only available option. Rosa saw him on the 2nd week. She was at her kitchen window when Daniel came up the walk, and she was at the window when she saw the big man on the motorcycle stop 50 feet from her gate and nod once and turn around. She went to the door. She called out to him across the street. She said, "Excuse me." Marcus stopped. She walked to the gate. Arthritic knees, cane in her right hand, the slow, deliberate pace of a woman who was not going to be stopped by anything as unremarkable as pain. She got to the gate and looked at this man, at the cut, at the patches, at the scar, and she looked at him the way she looked at everything, as a piece of information she needed to correctly read. She said, "You've been following my grandson home." Marcus said, "Yes." She said, "Why?" He told her, briefly, without drama or editorializing. 3 boys, 11 weeks, a photograph on the ground in an alley. He told her in the same tone he would have used to describe traffic. Rosa listened to all of it. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment. She had the stillness of someone who has already survived enough that new information does not shock them, only alters the picture. She said, "I didn't know." He said, "He's protecting you." She looked at him. Her eyes went bright for a moment, just a moment, and she brought it back. She said, "I'm Rosa Reyes." He said, "Marcus Red." She nodded once, the way people nod when something has been confirmed that they already suspected without knowing what they were suspecting. She said, "Do you want to come in for coffee?" He said, "I have to be in Harlan by dark." She said, "Tomorrow, then." He came the next day. He sat at Rosa's kitchen table and drank coffee from a ceramic mug that had a rooster on it, and Daniel sat across from him and did not speak for the first 20 minutes, and then asked him one question, which was, "Why do you have a scar there?" Marcus told him. A motorcycle accident. Not dramatic, just gravel and poor timing and a guardrail. He said it the way people say things that are over and cannot be changed. Daniel thought about this. He said, "Does it still hurt?" Marcus said, "Sometimes, less than it used to." Daniel thought about this too. He said, "The thing with those boys, does that get less too?" Marcus Red looked at this 9-year-old across the kitchen table. He looked at the question in it, not the surface question, which was about pain, but the real question underneath it, which was about time and whether it was on his side. "Yeah," Marcus said. "It does." Daniel put his hands flat on the table. He nodded. It was the nod of someone who has received confirmation of something they had decided to hope was true. The 3 weeks that followed were quiet. Marcus rode south. Garrett and his associates did not appear. Daniel walked home along the fences out of habit, and slowly, over days, then over weeks, he stopped walking so close to them. He still moved quickly. He still watched both ways at corners. But the particular quality of bracing was leaving his shoulders, the way a man straightens up when he has set down something he has been carrying long enough to forget it, is there. It was the Tuesday of the 4th week when Garrett tested it. He must have watched. He must have tracked the pattern, the weeks Marcus rode south, the positioning, the timing, and made the same calculation that bullies always make, which is, how long will the protection hold? His experience of adults was that protection did not hold long, that attention moved on, that eventually the large man would have somewhere else to be, and he would have Meridian Road back. He was 3 blocks from the school when Marcus, coming around the corner in the opposite direction from usual, saw him step out from between 2 parked cars. Garrett had a different energy that day. He had something to prove to the 2 boys behind him, which made him more dangerous than the boredom version. He stepped in front of Daniel. He said, "He's not always going to be here." And Marcus, who was still 100 feet away, kept walking. He did not run. He did not call out. He came around the corner, and he walked down the sidewalk at the same deliberate pace he always moved at. And Garrett saw him coming, and something complicated happened in Garrett's face, the bravado and the recalculation fighting each other for position. Marcus reached them. He stopped. He stood in the space between Garrett and Daniel. He looked at Garrett for a long time without speaking. Then he said, "You're right." Garrett blinked. "I'm not always going to be here," Marcus said, "but other people are going to know about this. And some of those people are going to be a lot less patient than me." He reached into his jacket pocket. He took out a card. He held it out. Garrett did not take it. Marcus set it on the ground in front of him. He said, "Give that to your father." He stepped back to Daniel's side, and they stood there, the 2 of them, and waited. The card sat on the sidewalk. Garrett looked at it. He looked at Marcus. He looked at the card again. He picked it up. He did not say anything. He turned, and his 2 associates turned with him, and they walked back the way they had come. The card had a phone number on it. Not Marcus's number. The number of a man named Ray Slocum, who was a sergeant with the Harlan County Sheriff's Department, and who had been friends with Marcus Red for 17 years, and who Marcus had called the night before and asked to be on standby for exactly this kind of conversation. He did not know if Garrett's father would call. He suspected he might, because fathers with sons like Garrett are often somewhere below their silence, afraid of what their sons are becoming, and grateful for an external pressure that gives them permission to act. Ray Slocum got a call at 7:47 that evening. He went to the house. He had a conversation with the father that lasted 40 minutes, and was, by the father's own account a week later, a conversation he should have started having 2 years ago. Nobody told it that way, of course. The town of Delwood heard the version that moved through schools and coffee shops and the counter at the Longhorn Diner over the following days. The version where a biker had been following a kid home. And people had seen it, and for several days it had seemed like one kind of story before it became clear it was a different kind entirely. Carol told it to a woman named Janet Marsh, who worked at the school board office, who told the principal, who pulled Daniel into his office on a Thursday and asked, gently, if Daniel wanted to tell him anything. Daniel looked at the principal's desk for a moment. He said, "It's been getting better." The principal called Rosa. Rosa told him what she knew. The principal called the school counselor. The counselor called Garrett's parents. By the following Monday, the thing that had been invisible for 11 weeks was suddenly, administratively, visible, which is when it became possible to do anything about it. Garrett was removed from the walking corridor for the rest of the semester. There were meetings. There were formal records. There was, eventually, a counselor assigned to all 3 boys. Whether it changed them is a question whose answer takes years and is not ours to know. What we can say is that it became harder to be what they had been, which is sometimes the most that is available. Daniel walked home on the Tuesday after the principal's call, and he walked down the center of the sidewalk, and Marcus Red was not at the corner of Birch and Fifth. He did not need to be. Daniel walked all the way to Rosa's gate, and he went through it, and up the porch steps and through the door, and Rosa was in the kitchen, and she heard him come in, and she heard the difference in it, the sound of a child arriving, rather than the sound of a child escaping. And she stood at her kitchen window with her coffee and looked out at the empty street for a long moment. She called Marcus that evening. He was somewhere north of Lexington. She could hear the highway behind him. She said, "He walked down the middle today." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "Good," he said. She said, "Where are you going?" He said, "I've got a run this weekend. Chapter thing up in Pikeville." She said, "And after?" He thought about Pete Corliss, gone 14 months now, and the memorial stone in Harlan, and all the road between here and there and back. He said, "Back this way, I think." Rosa said, "Daniel wants to know if you'll teach him how to ride one day." Marcus made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was related to one. "He's got about 8 years to go before that's a conversation," he said. Rosa said, "I'll tell him that." She said goodbye. She hung up. The kitchen was quiet. The October light came through the window at a flat angle and lay across the linoleum in a long yellow stripe. She looked at it for a while. Then she picked up her cane and walked to the hallway and called upstairs. She said, "Daniel, dinner." From upstairs, the sound of footsteps, moving at the ordinary pace of a child who does not have anywhere he is trying to get to fast. Just a boy, walking. Marcus Red rode into Delwood one more time that November, on a Saturday when the sky was the particular gray of clouds that have not decided yet whether to do anything about it. He stopped at the Longhorn. Carol gave him coffee without asking, and he drank it at the far end of the counter, back to the wall, and he sat there for 20 minutes before Rosa's number came up on his phone. She said, "We're home, if you want to stop." He finished his coffee. He put $2 under the mug for Carol, which was the same $2 he left every time, and which Carol folded into the pocket of her apron and put toward her granddaughter's college fund. He rode down Meridian Road. He parked in front of the green house on Callaway Street. Daniel was on the porch with a book. He looked up when he heard the engine. He watched Marcus get off the Harley with the careful seriousness of a boy who was studying something he intended to understand fully in 8 years. Marcus walked up the path. Daniel said, "I learned how to shift gears on a bicycle." Marcus said, "That's a start." He sat on the porch step. Daniel sat beside him. The gray sky held, and the street was empty and calm. And from inside came the sound of Rosa's radio and the smell of something cooking that involved garlic and was going to be excellent. They sat there for a while in the particular way of people who have established that silence between them is not a problem that needs to be solved. After a time, Daniel said, "Do you think he actually gave his dad the card?" Marcus thought about this. He thought about Garrett, the flash of something in his face when he picked that card up off the sidewalk, the thing under the bravado that was harder to name. "Yeah," Marcus said. "I think he did." Daniel considered this. He looked at the street. He looked at the place, 2 blocks down, where Meridian Road bent left and disappeared. He said good the radio played quietly inside. The sky held its gray. A single motorcycle sat at the curb of Calloway Street, cooling in the November air, its chrome going dull under the flat light. If you've ever been the person who wasn't noticed, or if you've known someone who kept walking anyway, alone, counting on a courage they had no reason to expect would be enough, share this one. Hit like. Subscribe so you don't miss the next story. And drop a comment below. Would you have done what Marcus did? Type Guardian in the comments if this one stayed with you.